James, thank you very much for inviting me back for the 2016 Centennial talks. I recognize some of the faces here from the program last year when I spoke on the Gallipoli, so welcome back. I'm glad that you were impressed enough to return for a second dose of my World War I experience. Now, this is a talk that's going to cover the battle, but I've tried to divide it up into a 50-50 presentation because, as James indicated, for a lot of people, especially in the English-speaking world, the Battle of the Somme, fought 100 years ago in 1960. As a matter of fact, it was actually underway now. The preliminary bombardment, lasting a week, had started leading up to the July 1st formal launching of the offensive. So 100 years ago, right now, the Battle of the Somme was really underway. That battle would become the most remembered battle of the Great War. It would define the Great War in many different ways, and we'll talk about that in the second part of the tour, of the talk, rather. But I think it's important to get a little grounding in what happened in the battle, where it was, and so forth. So let me begin with a little background here. The Somme was fought officially. The troops left the trenches on the 1st of July 1916, and it lasted 141 days until the 18th of November 1916, when everybody just said, that's it, that's all we've got in the end of the story. It was fought in northern France near the coast in the area called Picardy. And you can see the map here. The Somme is a river that leads out into the English Channel, North Sea, and it is very close to the Belgian border here. There's an associated battle, and I understand we have some people interested in the Australian side of things. Fromelles was a battle that will also be commemorated. You'll hear about this in the next month, fought by an Australian division in northern France in the middle of July. It was the worst day of the war for Australia. The Battle of Fromelles. It was actually a diversionary attack for the bigger offensive in the Battle of the Somme. It is most famous for being the worst battle in terms of casualties on the Western Front. The French had 204,000 killed, 420,000 for the British. Now those numbers are pretty hard. There's a lot of controversy about how many people the Germans lost in the battle. This is a middle figure from all the various estimates I've seen. The point is, Germany was on the defensive in this battle, and they still managed to lose a tremendous number of troops, and that is a valid point. Key commanders you'll hear about are these three gentlemen. These are the top guys. General Joseph Joffre is the commander-in-chief for all the French forces. The battle is his project. It's his program, and his commander on the site in the northern group of armies for France is Ferdinand Foch. The British, who will end up carrying the bulk of the battle, for reasons we'll explain shortly, is led by the newly appointed commander-in-chief in December 1915, Douglas Haig, who is a controversial figure, and we'll touch on that during the course of the battle, or in the presentation rather. Now, some memorable aspects about the Battle of the Somme. It's the major Allied initiative of 1916. It's the first day that is a total disaster for the British that is most remembered. It's a modest advance after all is said and done with tremendous high casualties for the Allies. It's unprecedented heavy casualties for the Germans because they were on the defense, and we'll talk about their thinking as to how that transpired. The first use of tanks pops up in the middle of this battle, September 15, 1916, and as I said to many people, and this was the Faulkner quote you saw on the opening slide, the past is never dead, it's not even past. The Battle of the Somme is the signature battle in the English-speaking world for World War I, and we'll talk about how that came to be and how it is still remembered today, and you will witness in the next month as they have commemorations of the opening of the battle, how that is still remembered today. Okay, the geography of the Somme is very interesting. I have been, in my travels, the entire length of the Western Front, except about the last 30 miles before the Swiss border. And this is typical of the 25-mile front line of the battlefield of the Somme. And the whole place looks like this, and there's no other place on the Western Front that looks like this, but for 25 miles, this is a repeat image. Rolling hills, open, with woodsy areas and villages scattered around it. Now, this particular slide here was selected with good reason. The morning of July 1st, 1916, this was the deadliest place on the planet Earth. This village here is called Freikorp. The German army had been there and been digging in since the fall of 1914. I think they captured it in October and have been digging in ever since then. The Western Front is actually off the screen about 150 miles, 150 yards up the road here. It runs perpendicular to this road we're seeing here. Freikorp has another road that runs here. So there's an intersection up here away that is a strong point of German machine guns. There are machine guns in Freikorp, and the front that kind of loops around the village goes up along this ridge right here. And so you're looking right at the Western Front of July 1st, 1916. Behind us on a little rise is a trench manned by the Devonshire Regiment, 2 battalions. They will go over the top at 7:30 a.m. on July 1st. Their officers have told headquarters about the machine guns in Freikorp, and they have expressed serious concern that they are wide open because, as you can see with the slopes, the Germans have a perfect view of what's happening down on this road. Well, nothing is done about the machine guns, and all the first wave, close to 100% casualties, is wiped out about the time they get to this road here. Afterwards, about 3 days later, the chaplain of the Devonshire Regiment is put in charge of the burial party, and he sees he has 161 bodies here. The wounded men have been evacuated, and he decides the only place to bury them is in the trench right behind us. So he has all the men buried in the trench, and then afterwards the Commonwealth War Graves Commission decides this will be the burial site of the Devonshire Regiment. So this trench is one of the pilgrimage spots on the Battle of the Somme. The Devonshire Cemetery has a sign in it. The Devonshires held this trench, the Devonshires hold it still. It's a pilgrimage site. One of the most famous poems associated with the battle was written by a lieutenant who was killed on the first day of the battle. We'll share that with you soon. Well, oh, by the way, another little detail about this site. On the other side of the village, the 10th West Yorkshire Regiment suffers the highest casualties of any unit attacking on July 1st. About 95% killed and wounded in the whole regiment. So as I said, this is a very deadly spot. But now, the second wave of the Devonshires push ahead a little. Unlike almost every place else on the Somme, They are able to advance. And to the right of them, which is south, there's a bigger advance by a couple divisions that captured a village called Montauban, a real stronghold. So after the disaster of the first day, following a pretty sound military principle of reinforcing your success and not your failures, which was basically everywhere else, they reinforce this sector, and what you're looking at becomes the main axis of attack for the entire Battle of the Somme. This area is called Caterpillar Valley, and if you see right up the top here, a little wood peeking out there, that is this wood. It's called high wood. It's one of the horseshoe of 5 woods that the Germans have entrenched in for the entire battle. They're not going to give them up because they're basically forts with trees. The high wood is 5 miles from this point, and we're about a mile from high wood right here. The British Army gets here in about 2 weeks. They get to capture the woods 2.5 months later. Because what the Germans have done in turning these into forts, you all know the story of Belleau Woods and the Marines at Belleau Wood. Well, the Somme has 5 Belleau Woods. At High Wood, which was one of the worst of them, there are 8,000 men never found that died in that wood. And there's cemeteries all around it. It's another one of the serious sites on the Somme battlefield. The Caterpillar Valley would, if this is point 0, they get a mile behind High Wood in the 141-day period, so they advance roughly 6 to 7 miles, and you saw the casualty figures that cost them that. So that's the terrain, and the key thing to remember is in almost every situation, the Germans are on a high point, they're well dug in, and they have a perfect view of the approaching troops. And that, in a nutshell, is how so many people were killed at the Battle of the Somme. Okay, now a few details about how this battle came about. First of all, 1915 and 16, the French are the senior partners of the battle. Britain entered the war with a small volunteer force, and they have been raising volunteer troops since 1914 with the encouragement of Horatio Kitchener, the Secretary of State for War. The French need to stay on the offensive because their country is occupied. They do not have the option of, we have to wait a few more years before we have the wherewithal to push the enemy out. And so the French commander, General Joffre, and his staff conceived this plan to attack side by side with the new British Army that's being built up and is going to be ready in good part by mid-1916. The British are to have about 28 divisions ready for the attack in the middle of the year, and they basically meet that requirement. The French are going to match that with 39 divisions of their own, so they're going to attack side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and blow their way through the German position. The Somme is an area that gives the, it's clean. It does not have a lot of shell holes, craters, and so forth. If an advance gets going, the troops aren't going to get bogged down. That's the thinking. It's not valid thinking, but that's what the thinking was. The major French and British armies can fight side by side, and the rolling open terrain gives a promise of a big breakthrough. That, as we've seen, is not, again, based on solid thinking about the terrain. This is a new Army unit. This is a group called the Hull Commercial PALS Battalion. PALS are groups from the same area or same trade or same affiliation that they have all enlisted together, and they've been promised they can serve together as chums. Sometimes you can, in those days, you get a commitment to serve with your best friend side by side. This is kind of the definitive bright-eyed and bushy-tailed troops marching to the first day of the Somme. They have no idea at all what's waiting for them. But this is the bulk of the British Army on July 1st. A few caveats under that great plan that came up. First of all, as we said, the Germans have been here since September and October of 1914 and have taken all the best terrain, all those high spots, all the high woods, all the villages have been fortified, and they have not been lacking in industriousness. Apparently they didn't have a climatology team on the planning, but it rains a lot in this part of the woods. And I checked the statistics. Between the start of the bombardment on the 23rd of June and the end of the battle, there are 82 days of rain reported in the Somme sector. What that means is whatever you're doing becomes 5 times as hard because you're bogged down in mud, whether it's resupply or advancing troops or whatever, or just staying alive in the trenches. Another thing that has happened, the Germans in February of 1916 decided they needed to pound on the French to reduce their forces, to bleed them dry, and they attacked in eastern France at a place called Verdun. That becomes a battle to the death, and the effect that has on the Somme is it's constantly reducing the availability of French troops, ammunition, and supplies for the Somme sector. So the plan started out in late 1915. The French were going to have 39 divisions on the Somme. On day one, real time, it comes down to 11 divisions, 5 of which were able to attack on the first day of the Somme. So the French commitment has been radically reduced. The Battle of the Somme, in good part, is a British battle, but I don't think that's totally fair. I have a few sidebar slides in here. This is how they entrench themselves on the Somme. These are actually from the Somme battlefield. Below here, you have a trench with triple belt barbed wire, and you see what happens to people who try to get through that and are caught by machine guns. And they have dug in deep entrenchments. This is not the typical trench that you see in the Hollywood production of World War I showing trench warfare. This is thought to be a place called Y Ravine, which will be attacked on the first day. And by the way, this is not a top-of-the-line bunker. They actually have concrete plants behind the front. They have 3-story subterranean concrete bunkers with stairways with railings on them that are quite remarkable. This is how well dug in the opposition is on July 1st. Okay, July 1st, sad day. This is a group that is going to attack on July 1st. This photograph here is taken on the morning of July 1st, about the time this explosion goes off nearby. This is one of the most famous pictures of the Somme battle. It's taken 10 minutes before the jump-off hour, 7:20 a.m. It's on Hawthorne Ridge. It's known as the Hawthorne Mine Crater. It will fail completely. It doesn't blow out the enemy because they've got a 10-minute time to get back and reestablish the line before the fellows in front of them attack. The same division that's attacking here is attacking at a place south of there. And if we could go back in time to these soldiers, who, by the way, these do not look like the whole commercial pals, do they? These guys have been around the block. They have seen what's waiting for them because they were the one division that landed the first day at Gallipoli, fought the entire Gallipoli campaign from Cape Helles to Suvla Bay, and then were rotated to the Somme, and they're the only division that was at Gallipoli that also attacks on the first day of the Somme. It's a 29th division, a regular division made up of Dominion forces from around the world and from England. It includes, some of you who attended the Gallipoli talk last year remember the story about the 6th VC before breakfast by the Lancashire Regiment. It's the same regiment that attacks Hawthorne Ridge here. These fellas are from Newfoundland. If we could go back in time and talk to them, as concerned and anxious as they are now, they might be surprised to hear a few details about where they are. They might for instance, find out that this road here is named after their provincial capital, St. John's, Newfoundland. They gave that name to this road right here. And they'd be also surprised that just over the lip of this trench begins one of the most beautifully maintained battlefield memorials in the world, Newfoundland Park Memorial on the Somme battlefield. And I don't think I'd get around to telling them why this would be so, because these fellows would attack in the a later wave at the Somme when the opposition was all ready for them. They had every position covered, and they would lose 95% of their men within an hour. So these guys have basically about an hour to live, and within that time, almost all of them will be dead, dying, or crying out for medical help. It's one of the stories of the first day of the Somme that kind of captures the whole experience. So I tried to give you the Devonshire Free Court introduction and the story of the Newfoundland Regiment, the 29th Division, to give you a feel for the first day of the Somme. There's whole books written about it. One of the great classics of World War I literature is The First Day of the Somme by Martin Middlebrook. But we're going to move on to that, beyond that, because the battle actually lasted 141 days. So now we need to talk about the other 140 days of the Somme. First day, one little addendum, Ferdinand Foch, who is commander of the French forces, is totally unenthusiastic about this operation from the beginning. But he personally is loyal to Joffre, who salvaged his career back in 1914. So he attacks in the first day for the French, which covers about a 7-mile front, is pretty successful because A, his troops are veterans of Verdun. They've been fighting this high-intensity warfare for most of the year anyway, and he is a candidate for the outstanding general of World War I. And so it's very well done on the French end, but when things get bogged down on the British side, then Foch backs off and doesn't push things. Incidentally, we're going to show you something at the end that shows how valid Foch's thinking was. Foch says this breakthrough here doesn't do any good because the Germans, 10 miles away from here, have a more defensible line, and all they would have to do is withdraw to that line. And you're going to see how that prediction came true. French troops at the Somme, they were more effective generally, but they ended up getting bogged down like everybody else in the long battle. Okay, this is a top-down look of where we were so you can follow how the battle develops. I'm going to have to stand a little closer here. Okay, this is the Somme River, namesake for the Battle of the Somme. It has a tributary named the Ancre that comes up by a town called Albert, runs north, and the yellow line is the battlefield of July 1st. We were, one other point, there's a road, a Roman road, almost a straight arrow from Albert to a place called Beaumont Hamel down the road here, about 12 miles. And this is kind of the center of the British sector during the war. There's a little bit cut off here, a little bit cut off down here, but at Fricourt and down here at Montauban, wiped out there for a minute, there have been some advances. So the rest of the Battle of the Somme is going to mainly involve moving down this axis. Here are those 5 woods, or in this horseshoe here. High Wood is right here. You were looking at it from about this point right here. And after they capture High Wood, they mount another major offensive in September, push it about a mile further, and that's the Battle of the Somme. Notice there's not a lot of action up here. We'll talk about that. So, Albert-Bapaume Road, very important landmark. South of that is where most of the action is going to be during the middle period of the Somme. The French, by the way, are on either side of the River Somme from the town called Maricourt. French are on this side, French are on that side, and they will make their own progress on the first day. That will pretty much be it for the French effort early in the battle. Okay, this is one of the woods. This is the first of the woods they attacked. We're seeing the tail end here of the Welsh dragon overlooking the Metz woods. This has a lot of literary implications. People like Siegfried Sassoon, Robert Graves fought here. You can see it's the same problem though. There's actually a little creek here down the bottom. So from the memorial, and this is right on the trench line, the Welsh were attacking in the middle of the battle. They have to go down here and across a couple hundred yards of open field where the Germans have machine guns all the way through here. So this is the tragedy of the Welsh division. Siegfried Sassoon is observing this. He writes, before the battle, their job is to take some cursed wood. The other dimension of that middle period is that Beaumont Hamel Road is just north of here. That's the flank, so they have to secure that. To do that, and we had somebody interested in the Australian, this is when the Australian divisions arrive at the Somme in the middle period. They are put down the advance, put in charge of the advance down the Albert-Bapaume Road. A place called Posiers is their cavalry. There's a double valley section called the Mash and Sausage Valley. They attack down there, and they take more casualties there than they took in all their time at Gallipoli. They're replaced by Canadians, who are pictured here, and one of them described the action on that road. We were shelled to hell ceaselessly. And that's basically the middle period of the battle, because the Germans have decided they are going to not bend, they're going to counterattack and regain any losses, and they were going to reinforce failure. Where they're breaking, they're going to pump in new troops. That's kind of the reverse of the sound military principle of reinforcing your successes. The Germans fall in the trap of reinforcing their failures and breakdowns, and that's going to be the source of all their heavy casualties. Remember, in 1914, they used to say the machine gun has a great advantage defensively, artillery, massed, going to wipe out any infantry attacks. Somehow, on the defensive, the Germans managed to lose a comparable number to the Allied forces. Okay, in the course of the offensive, there is a technological development that the generals know about, and success has been so difficult to come by, they decide we're going to wait for this new innovation to arrive, and it's the tank. The tanks are going to lead a renewed offensive in September down the Beaumont Road and through the valley of the woods there. And you see them here on the Somme battlefield. This is a description from one of the troops who've seen this tanks for the first time. Lumbering slowly towards us came three huge mechanical monsters, such as had never been seen before. So the story of this tank at the Somme, though, is very, very weak. They are not perfected mechanically, to say the least. They have all sorts of problems. German use artillery, direct line of fire to knock out some of them. Basically, they are not a factor, and they're not the magic solution at the Somme that was hoped for. Their big battle would be in November of 1917, in a place called Cambrai, east of here. But anyway, great hopes went missing there. And so what has happened in the late actions is they pushed a little tiny bit, maybe a mile, beyond the woods. At some point they decide, well, this north section needs a little more attention, so they launch attacks north of the Albert-Bapaume Road, a place called Thiepval. These are big names in the history of the Somme. We don't have time to get into all of them, but we are going to return to Beaumont Hamel shortly. This red line will be the max advance of the Battle of the Somme. So basically, they bumped a little in the opening, they got beyond the woods by September, and then they got a little bit more padding on the front line from mid-September to mid-November. What happens right at the end? What you're looking at are the two final battlefields of the Battle of the Somme. I think I'll end up with the Beaumont Hamel story here. This is, right over here is the Albert Wampum. You're looking back at Albert. You're about 7 miles from the original front line right here. This is a marker put up by the Western Front Association. It's on an old ceremonial burial hill called Butte de Warlencourt. Butte de Warlencourt has changed hands several times, but the Germans are not going to give it up. So the Battle of the Somme ends right at the base of Butte de Warlencourt. And that's as far as they can get, and they finally throw up their hands and say, we just can't advance beyond that. Now, they're still sore about what happened with the Newfoundland Regiment and the 29th Division over at Beaumont Hamel. And so this becomes another major battlefield the last week of the offensive. So it has this peculiar quality of being a tough battlefield on day one and at the end of the war. Remember our soldiers in the trench? They were right here. Okay, to recap their story, in the, I believe it was the third wave, they are moved out of the trench, they go through these trees here, they come over the top. The German line is right about here. This is that Y ravine, you saw a picture of it down there, and every machine gun on the front in this sector opens up on them. There's a little tree here called the danger tree, which is today actually a concrete replica of the original danger tree, to which the few guys that got beyond it sought sanctuary, and of course they were wide open, and they got the machine gun right where they were. So this is how one regiment lost 95% of its men going into an open field. By the way, this is sloped downward, so the Germans are, machine guns are elevated, so they're looking right up the slope of these guys advancing. It's basically a can't miss shot for machine guns of that period. The town of Beaumont Hamel was the objective of the troops on July 1st, so they put in a Scots division, the 51st Scots Division, and they are given the job of recapping and recapitulating the advance of July 1st, and in 3 days, the 13th through the 16th, I guess that's 4 days, they managed to secure what will become Newfoundland Memorial Park in the village of Beaumont Hamel. That is the end of the Battle of the Somme. And we're going to do the map one more time. It might be the next slide here. Just a little hardcore military stuff for you. What was the big cause of the failure of the Battle of the Somme? It was all artillery. Couple of notes here. First, note, to begin with, they didn't have enough guns. They didn't know how much heavy artillery was needed to bust those trenches in the barbed wire. They had 4 missions, cut the barbed wire, had the wrong fuses. John Keegan, in his book, The Face of Battles, talks a lot about that. To destroy the trenches and readouts, well, you can hit the guys on the top trench, and people 3 stories down are going to survive. So that failed. The big failure was they did not counter battery fail. Now, artillery can have direct fire to somebody right in front of you, or it can have indirect fire shooting over the horizon. All the enemy artillery is over the horizon. So you have to have the capability of targeting that battery of artillery that is going to shoot at your men when they leave the trenches. And that capability simply did not exist yet in 1916. There was some rudimentary work, but they had trouble determining where the enemy batteries were. And if you can't find them, you can't shoot at them, you can't hit them. And so that was a big breakdown. Remember at Montauban, that was the best advance of the day at the south end of the sector. Next door to the British are the French, who have been practicing artillery at Verdun for 6 months. They knock out the counter batteries at that sector because they're in a position to hit the French forces when they're advancing. So the British forces benefit from the French artillery expertise down in that sector, and that is one of the success stories of the first day of the Somme. And then the idea of a rolling barrage, that varied tremendously. Some infantry commanders, some artillerymen worked together and understood what it was, trained the troops, but it was not a universally appreciated technique, and it was not used in many cases on the Somme on the first day or even afterwards. And then just to make matters really bad in the artillery area, there's a tremendous number of duds, 40% by some estimates, and a high number of those duds were manufactured in the United States of America. Okay, one last map exercise, and then we'll move on to the heritage of the battle. Okay, we now remember that the front line here, British to here, French from down here. This is as far as they got, 7 miles in some places. South of the road, the biggest advance. North of the road, they bite off a little. And right here, you just stop. That's where Butte, the Orland Court is, and they could never get a hold of that. Now, I've superimposed one other line on here. What is hatched in the white markers here are the objectives of the battle, of the Somme. And you can see down here, they exceeded those objectives. Up north, no, they didn't come close. However, there's one catch here. These were the objectives for the first day of the Somme. The big plan was to break through at Beaumont, get in the enemy rear, roll them up. That was a dream that was not technically feasible. And for those of you who were here at the Gallipoli talk last year, I sort of had the same feelings about the Somme as I do about Gallipoli. It was what they tried to accomplish was beyond the command and control technical capabilities of the Army at that time. They needed to set their sights lower and have a more practical approach, which they didn't. The Somme will always be with us because of the tragedy that ensued. Now, the Somme, remember, again, Sassoon. Sassoon was in reserve on the first day of the Somme with the 38th Welsh Division, but he had a great observation post. And he described that first day as a sunlit picture of hell. Didn't rain that day, it was hazy in the morning, and then the haze lifted, it was a beautiful sunny day to die on. This is the most substantial memorial on the Somme battlefield. It's on a place called Peaceball Ridge, I've alluded to. It is a combined French and British cemetery recognizing the joint nature of the battle. However, this monument itself is all British. Engraved on it are the names of 73,000 men who died in the sector whose bodies were never recovered. And that's the Peaceball Memorial. It's got matching memorials at the Benengate in Ypres and in Messines and all over the Western Front, but this is the champion for the British practice. So this is the way they commemorate their missing in action. And there's 73,000 names there. That, of course, is one good reason to remember the Somme. Another thing is, it's almost inhuman in scale. Have many of you ever traveled there, just a show of hands? Well, I think you have a feel that everything is bigger and more substantial to deal with, and I hope you got to see the biggest mine crater on the Western Front. It's at Lac Nagar. It's pretty close to that road we keep mentioning. When you go to the edge of it, it's really like seeing the meteor crater in Arizona. I mean, it's just stupendous. There were 4 charges that were set off here on the morning of July 1st. This is where the commemorative ceremonies start on July 1st. They'll have a 7:30 a.m. Ceremony here, limited invitations, of course. You can only fit so many people in there. But this, you will probably just discredit it. He's kicked up, given the kind of ceremonial duties for almost a year. Luckily, he's rehabilitated in time for the 1918 campaign, where he will be the most clear-headed thinker of all the Allied generals. Yes?
Was there ever a thought of trying to use the aviation for the Allies to try and spot the artillery?
That was the technology that was being developed. The Royal Flying Corps, to become Royal Air Force, was interacting with the artillery, and also the engineers were surveying maps. And it just takes a while to get this together. And according to John Terrain, they actually got a comprehensive map on the survey of the Western Front in late 17. And that's why things loosened up in 1918. The French were better. As a matter of fact, your speaker next week, Terry Finnegan, is an expert on this. They are very far ahead of the curve on coordinating artillery fire with the different missions to be accomplished, and using aviation intelligence and aerial reconnaissance. Terry, how much do you want me to build you up here?
Sorry?
Have I built you up enough, or?
Well, I'll sell books at the end of the show.
Oh, okay. Yeah, he's got a book on this that'll tell you especially how the French solved this problem. That's why the fronts get moving in 1918. They solved this problem because basically you have to coordinate the artillery with the infantry movement, with the logistics trains, and get them all moving at the same time, shooting at the same target. And that's why 15, 16, 17 are such bloody messes. So I hope that answers your question. Yes, sir.
I know the British and the French, from their vast empires, brought in a lot of colonial troops.
Yes,
how about the Germans?
Not so much. They had a smaller empire.
In Africa, for
Yeah, in Africa, they used them exclusively after they found out that black water fever killed their German troops with great frequency. They used the local troops. Are you familiar with von Lito Borbeck and his? He was the German commander. He's kind of a genius at guerrilla warfare, and they never caught him in the whole African campaign. And he used native bearers and troops almost exclusively. Yes.
What is trench fever?
I think it's a bacterial infection. Comes with low hygiene. I've seen articles that indicate amongst homeless people today it is still an issue. You're living in muddy, crummy trenches, not the healthiest environment.
And it generally affects the lower extremities.
Okay.
Affects what?
The feet and the legs. I was wondering, were the majority of the German troops ensconced in the woods?
Oh, yes, and they had machine gun nests that were cross-registered. So, and remember, they can see outside the woods. The guys outside can't see into the woods.
Exactly.
So it's a tremendous advantage. But the Belleau Wood story, when you read about what the Marines went through there, it's the same story. And I left this out. Highwood, they tried everything. They rotated units in. They tried different. They even sent Indian Lancers against Highwood. Now, if you can believe that, and believe it or not, they had some success because the Germans were so shocked. What is going on here? They kind of got surprised a little, but it was a tough nut to crack. By the way, you had some follow-up.
I want to tell you how much I enjoyed this.
Oh, thank you.
Down in Columbus, New Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
there's a plaque that says that during the battle with Pershing,
Mm-hmm.
that this was the first time tanks were used. And I wondered, it was, I believe, in the same year, but was it American tanks or British, not that it's really important.
Yeah, I find that astonishing. Americans did help develop the tank. The whole tractor company over in Stockton played a big role in the development of the tank.
Mark.
Yes, yeah.
I don't know why I remember that so succinctly, but there's...
No, I just published an issue on the General Pershing's Mexican tank. You're exactly right. I just didn't run across that in any of the research we've done. Good.
Thank you.
Good fact. Yes, sir.
Mike,
Wasn't Alan Seeger the uncle of Pete Seeger?
Yes, it is.
Oh, really?
And by the way, he also did newspaper correspondence, and he was a crackerjack newspaper correspondent for one of the New York papers. Quite excellent. He's worth reading. If we're in a library, I bet somewhere here you can find Alan Seeger's diary and letters, and it's or interlibrary loan. It's worth a read if you're interested in all of
I think he was first.
Okay. Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to know how it felt to be in that Somme battlefield with all those lost souls and how that affected you.
Oh, it's very affecting. I was very worried that I was going to tear up when I told you the Devonshires held this trench, the Devonshires hold it still. I mean, that to me is a very powerful place.
I'm assuming you're a resident of the area. How long have you been in this area?
Well, I live down in the East Bay area, grew up in San Francisco.
But you live here now somewhere.
Yeah, I returned to the Bay Area when I got out of the Air Force in the 70s. Yes, sir.
Am I correct that the young officer Charles de Gaulle, later president of France, was interested in tank warfare during the war?
Not during this war, in the interwar period. De Gaulle was captured at Verdun very early in the battle, probably about early March, I would guess, by the village of Beaumont. And he became an escape artist, and he actually broke out 5 or 6 times. But the Germans had a very easy time finding this tall guy with a gigantic nose that spoke with a French accent. So they kept recapturing him. He gets out of the army, he immediately reactivates, and he's in the group that goes to Poland and observes the Polish-Soviet war. And so at this time, he decides, my niche is, everybody's doing it all wrong, and I see the niche and it's armored warfare. And so he jumps on that bandwagon, like Heinz Guderian does for Germany, and Patton and Nike do for America. And he's an equivalent figure on that matter. Yes, sir.
When they had the machine guns emplacements, did they also employ the trench mortars as well? Did that have a role in the battle?
I'm not sure that's so much a defensive weapon, but the Germans had this interesting type mortar called minnow warfare that took a bunch of guys to move, and it sort of looks like one of those round Civil War howitzers, but it really took a toll. It was a very effective weapon. It came in different sizes, and it was used against our troops in 18, and they didn't like it. I'm going to give him a turn. Yes, sir.
Yes, when did the Germans start preparing for war and digging trenches and stuff, and then the French woke up that Houston we had a problem?
Well, are you talking about World War I?
Yes.
Well, trench warfare evolved organically out of the war of movement. The original battle plans for both sides were wars of movement, and they didn't work. And so the troops in place started dodging a lot of fire, artillery, machine guns. They just spontaneously started digging, and eventually it became systematic. And there's actually a date you can point to, October 31st, 1914, the last gap of the Western Front is the last chance for a breakthrough is at the east of the town of Ypres, and the British plugged the gap, and that completes a continuous Western Front from the English Channel to the Swiss border. And that holds in place until, and again, you can date the end, March 21st, 1918, the Germans mount the first of their spring offensives. That's the end of trench warfare. So you can actually date that. Nobody planned to do it, but it's something they had to live with for 3 years.
Well, I know you talked about machine guns through there for the Germans. You also clearly talked about, in a sense, the Germans having great artillery control. What was it upon the Allied sides that it offered any artillery help for during with this battle?
Well, you know, when the Yanks went over, they studied under the French. They,
Cordless.
pardon?
I'm thinking that the cordless gun or whatever was at the time it started.
75.
Oh, the 75, we use those. We use a lot of the Allies' weapons because they wanted troops, not guns. And so they basically supplied us. Even the aircraft, for the most part, they were foreign purchased. But there was a general feeling. See, we had relations with these different countries before the war. Military officers were in exchange program. George Patton, before the war, studied at the French cavalry school. And so they had kind of sized up who knows what, and we basically were taught artillery by the French, and I think that's probably a good thing. The British, up until that 1918 period, was behind the curve, I think, for the most part, up until that time. Maybe they brought themselves up. Yes, sir.
During the Battle of Somme, were there any attempts at nighttime maneuvers?
Yeah, there was an assault on Metz Wood that turned out to be a real disaster. They didn't have the communications and control to keep track of things, so it usually failed. Yes?
I've been reading about the radio intercepts they were doing before World War I. How much did they know? Because they were spying on, listening to the radios.
Yeah.
How
But
much
I can't speak to the radio intercepts, but I can tell you that the Germans had captured and interrogated enough Allied prisoners to pretty much know exactly what was going to happen on July 1st. Yeah.
Thank you again.
Okay, no, one more, George.
Was poison gas used in this battle?
Yes, never decisively, as far as I've read. But yes.
Just by the Germans?
No, both sides.
Both sides.
And this is a period when they had not yet learned to control things, and sometimes it backfired on them. And so they were basically careful at this period in using it.
I just have one final question. The British suffered 425,000 casualties. Do you know what percentage of the population that comprised, approximately?
Not off the top of my head. I'll have to get back to you. So send me an email, and I don't know exactly where to find that.
Okay.
Okay, any other? Thank you,
Yes,
Bert.
if I may.
Okay, sure.
It's a quick one.
Okay.
I wanted to make note of the last name of the screen with all of the writers, and it was
Yes.
the top, second from the right, and I think his name was Ernst, a great German writer, and was his last name?
Ernst Junger.
Thank you.
J with a U with an umlaut, N-U-G-E-R.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, one last week, yes, people wanted to, go ahead, sir.
Oh, I just wanted to know, out of the British troops, do you know what percentage of colonials versus people from the British Isles were killed?
No, that's an interesting question, because the colonials came in that middle phase. The Australians, Canadians, South Africans, and so forth. And that one, I'm not sure how to track that down, but that is an interesting question.
Do you have a website?
WorldWar1.com.
And I've got sheets right here of splash page, so got it right here.
Oh, I didn't get one of those.
Hey, Mike.
Thank you.
Show.